à tous et bienvenue pour...
Hello everyone and welcome for this session on food security. It's a crucial matter where we have 10 billion people in 2050, where agricultural soils are limited and unequally distributed on the planet. The international context today with the war in Ukraine and global warming compels us to dwell into the question of food safety, namely the availability of resources, access to resources, the use that we make thereof, and how can we ensure stability for these resources so as to feed the whole population in the world. So we're going to look into the geopolitical dimension, food safety, but also the role of Europe and the issue of Africa and the necessity to build systems that are inclusive to curb hunger. So I would like to give the floor to Kikos Weizenman. Kikos, you have the floor. Hello, you are an economist and you have coordinated this whole session. Hello, I would like to say a few words to introduce this session. Food safety is threatened in the short and long term. Short term because of crisis, the interruption of exchanges during the lockdown due to COVID-19, then the war in Ukraine, which is an exporting country of wheat and fertilizers. Food safety is also threatened, structurally speaking, more structurally than over the long term, because the global change is already happening, and also due to the demographic change. We have to feed an 8 billion planet, 8 billion inhabitants. We are reaching a threshold where there are regions where there are less populations and more available soils, and other regions, this is Europe for instance, and other regions in the world where we have more population and less soils where we can farm. We can do farming, like in Africa. So an excess of supply, an excess of demand on the one hand and on the other hand. And for this, we need to have more trade, international trade. So food safety is not only a matter of self-sufficiency. We'll go back to that during this debate. The number of people who do not eat enough has multiplied since 1990 and has multiplied since 2015. I'm talking before COVID and before Ukrainian war. It has touching 10% of the world population, and it will be even more the case afterwards. So it's the end of the world that touches 1 out of 5 people, 1 out of 10 in Asia and Latin America, and even less in Europe and in the US. But in 2030, we think that hunger will touch 670 million people in the world. That's 8% for the world population. We go back to the same rate as in 2015. We haven't made any progress, but 2030 was an objective, an SDG that we all had, and we had an objective that we had set ourselves. Another sustainable development goal was to eliminate poverty, to eliminate malnutrition, and to promote sustainable agriculture, and this is beyond reach. How can we perceive this objective? How can we reach it beyond feeding the population? We have to ensure healthy food, healthy nutrition, and it needs to rely on a lot of fruit and vegetables. You know that these are actually very expensive and they're beyond the budget of underprivileged households. And it touches also the poor and middle class, some middle class households. Food safety relies on 6 pillars. The 3 first pillars is availability and accessibility, namely affordability in terms of price, and the nutritional characteristics, This is what we mean by use. And these three pillars concern not only the farmers, but also the industries and services. These industries and services are themselves reshaping themselves and consolidating themselves. And this has an impact on food safety. Food dependence is not only depending upon some countries, but also some important multinationals that are very large and are very important for our nutrition. Then stability, that's another pillar. Especially in times of crisis and conflicts, we should not use food as a weapon, as some countries do nowadays. Another pillar is sustainability, the capacity to regenerate food for the future generations on environmental basis, social basis, but also economic principles. The last pillar is agency. It's a concept that was introduced by Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize winner, to make sure that individuals and groups can have a word, that their voice can be heard. Nothing about us without us. This is the concept. So, food security is multidimensional, multi-stakeholder, with objectives and interests that may be contradictory and diverging. How can we find a solution? This is the question that I'm asking to the speakers today. Thank you.
Alors, on va poursuivre cette session.
So we will continue with you, Michel Barnier. Thank you for accepting this invitation. You are a European Commissioner. You are a former Minister of Agriculture, and you've written a book, Who's Gonna Feed the World? You were raising the question in 2008 already. We saw that the Ukrainian war was actually an eye-opener in terms of our dependence with regards to Ukraine. The matter of production is also an important question in a changing world. What kind of solutions can you give us on this question? Has Europe a role to play? Hello, each of you. Thank you for your attention. Despite the heat, that's actually part and parcel of the problem that we'll have to tackle within this roundtable. Thank you for your invitation. I'm no longer a European Commissioner. I have been for 10 years. And I do have some memories, even though I do not have any nostalgia. I would like to give you some of my input with the experience that I could acquire over my long career. On the European side, first, the common agricultural policy and the danger that it undergoes, and also the Ukrainian war and the place of Europe in the world, because we're not alone, definitely. So on the common agricultural policy, it's a wonderful project. This was misunderstood, that was not well explained. It consolidated the unity. I'm not talking about uniformity, I'm talking about unity around this economic policy. It was the first economic policy that created unity at the time. And it responded to two questions related to food security. First of all, sufficiency. Do we have enough food, enough abundance, and also safety? Is it traceable? And our products need to be safe. And the quality needs to be there as well. This is the deal that we made with the farmers at the time. Mr. Blondy can talk about it with me, with a dimension that justifies the common agricultural policy. It's the financial agreements for the maintenance and livelihood of the territories. If we were to suppress the common agricultural policy, it would cost much more with what we would have to import because we're not producing enough. And the food would have no taste anymore, as the food would be the same as what we have in the US. We have a lot of quality, a lot of taste, a good traceability right now. and also for the livelihood of the different regions of Europe. We have to adjust, we have to adapt all the time and rise to the challenges, the pandemics that touch both human beings and animals, the quality of water, research, resistance of products and plants, and a lot of challenges also. Waste, ladies and gentlemen. 1/3 of the food that we produce is lost or is subject matter of waste. There's a lot of challenges ahead of us. There's a lot of endeavors ahead of us. I'm saying this at a time where in Brussels we use a word more and more that is being used in the precedent roundtable, if I heard well, the degrowth. There is an ideology that is gaining momentum in Brussels that is tantamount to say, to pollute less, we have to produce less. I think that we work in a wonderful region not far from here, and I have been minister for several times. I think we should pollute less, but produce more. And I think we can produce more and pollute less with the farmers, with the research and innovation. These are the big challenges. If we produce less in Europe, then we break the deal with the farmers, but we also open up gaps. And immediately, the Chinese, the Brazilians, and the Americans will use these gaps for their own benefits. So the big debate in Brussels now is to resist this new ideology of degrowth, saying, and I would say that we should pollute less but produce more with the farmers. Second thing, Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia are two large countries producing cereals, and this destabilizes all markets, including what we see in Ukraine, because it defends sovereignty and their values that are ours as well in Ukraine. When I think that we have to consolidate the perspective of being European with them one day. But everything is all about instability, and we have a crisis, a war beyond the solidarity that we owe to the Ukrainians. We have to reduce our dependence. Energy dependence, gas, electricity, oil. We have to diversify. We have to depend less on one single partner to have more independence in terms of energy safety, but also in terms of food security. As my wife or myself were looking for some oil at the time, it was only produced in Ukraine, sunflower oil, and we could see that we couldn't find it anymore because it was produced in Ukraine. So we have no lessons to give to the world, but we have a role to play, and it has an impact on the order or disorder of the world, or chaos in the world. I think we should be patriots, but also Europeans. If we're not Europeans, we're stuck. We're effed. And we won't be at the table where the important decisions of the world are going to be made. We're not here to give lessons. We have interests. The others are there and make decisions, and we should have also solidarity. I would like to convey 4 ideas. First of all, the trade. There's a new word that we have been introducing in the trade negotiations with the EU, because this is a European prerogative, namely reciprocity. That's a very important word for agriculture. We do not import products here that do not comply with the standards that we impose on our own farmers. This is reciprocity. Second idea, cooperation and development. We talk a lot about immigration, and this will grow in the years to come. It's not only a matter of borders, but it can be also a matter of cooperation with Africa, for instance, whole continents. And as to the riots, because we do not talk a lot about this, but it's not only a matter of safety, but it's also other solutions that we need to implement. So as for immigration, Africa, we have an interest, but also a duty to cooperate. And when I was a Minister of Agriculture, there are large African regions in West Africa, North Africa, Eastern Africa, and the center have an interest in, as we have done, with their own culture, their own methods, their own traditions, something that would be tantamount to a single market, to pool resources. This is something that I like. This is what characterizes the European project. The aim is to pool resources and respect differences, pooling water, pooling all the resources, but also to fight against risks. I'm talking about crickets and everything else. We are stronger together. And if there were to be a common agricultural policy in Africa, it would be easier for us to cooperate with them. That's the second idea. Another idea, we should master agricultural financial markets. I was a European regulator. There's too much speculation. There are some people that do not like the light, and they manage everything in the shade, and they do not care about starvation and hunger. We should have more reporting, more transparency, so that some people in Switzerland or in Chicago do not manage the agricultural markets to the detriment of consumers and producers. The idea is that this could involve a lot of money. We'll have to finance ecological transition, the climate transition, and give that money to some countries that do not have the necessary means to do so. I'm talking with the economists that are quite liberal. I still am convinced, and I had this conviction before, we should have a tax on financial markets at a low rate with a wide basis to get the money that we need to finance the ecological transition. Thank you. Thierry Blandinière. You are the general manager of InVivo, the first agricultural cooperative with 10 billion euro turnover. You heard your colleague. Do you share the same view about the challenges ahead of us? We should produce more, pollute less, reduce our dependence, but also the importance of Europe's scalability to have food security. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to come once again, despite the heat, but we have to adapt. I would say, on everything that has been said by Mr. Barnier, that we can only be in agreement. And how can we translate it into an economic model for businesses? And how, with public policies, we can respond to the economic, societal, and environmental expectations. The Ukrainian crisis, the health crisis, has revealed to the public opinion that France had a strong agriculture. We could continue producing, not only for France, but also at the European scale, and that has been said, but also for our friends in Africa. We have increased our production potential to set off some of the lacking volume in Ukraine, and we have exported more cereals to Africa in a significant way over the last months. So sovereignty for us is at the European level. We have to reinforce public policies and the common agricultural policy. It is essential. And we should not put the common agricultural policy into silos. We should have more verticality in this common agricultural policy. When we talk about sovereignty, it's a matter of competitiveness. It's a matter of world fight in a fragmented world with crises back to back. And we should not forget all about the common agricultural policy as we forgot everything about our industry, for instance. So we have to use it as an asset for the French consumers, for European consumers, even if the world has changed geopolitically. We have our word to say. We have something to say. And it is an important lever. And Putin is using it strongly. In 2014, I would like to remind you, there was the first invasion of Crimea, a few provinces as well. The war started in Ukraine. We talked about it a little bit. There was a boycott. The response from Putin said, well, I'm rebooting my agricultural policy. Before they were importing French cereals, and now it's the first exporting country of cereals. So you can see the resilience of the Russian economic model. We should not underestimate it. And geopolitics in Africa is terrible for us, because we can see the Chinese settling in everywhere in Africa, and we see also the Russians coming in terms of food security. More and more we see them. And we are in the margin. In Algeria, for instance, which was essentially a country which had a strong bond with France, orders most of its cereals in Russia. Half of it. And we have to react. We have to make relevant proposals and be competitive. It's 20 euros. The 20 euros the ton is actually less expensive than for others. So we need to have a competitive edge. We need to have competitive prices to be on a level playing field, to be sustainable. Because inflation is a real problem, it has been said. The right level is a common ground in terms of price, so we can continue to export worldwide for the sake of our agriculture and know-how. It needs to be sustainable, it needs to be innovative, and we need to be a pioneer agriculture in the agricultural world at large. We are a big agricultural country in France. We've had a lot of talents in terms of innovation in France. We need to recreate that innovative, fertile ground. When we talk about agriculture, we talk about fertilizers, GMOs. When we talk about GMOs, we talk about NBTs, you know, the dogmatic assimilations that exist today in Europe, which is not a subject in other countries of the world. I don't know if we're going to reach the end, but the discussions that we have to try to decouple the NBT, the natural hybridization of plants, and not to assimilate them to GMOs is a solution and an answer to the equation of having a more sustainable agriculture. There are solutions on the table today, and at the European scale, we need to have big champions to fight against the big competitors in the world. Agriculture is fragmented, but in the world, you have 4 or 5 large corporations that regulate all the agriculture, the famous ABCD, and none of them is in France. We had one, but it went to Switzerland. So we have to recreate large European champions. We have to imagine and discuss with the Germans to create an Airbus of agriculture, so that at the European scale we could have a big European economic champion to be able to see eye to eye with the other competitors in agriculture. We need to have an economic stakeholder that can be at the right size. This is our project, and we need to finance innovation and sustainability. Thank you.
Amadou Seck.
Yes, you are the Associate General Director and also Vice President of the MEDEF, the Employers Trade Union in Senegal. You've heard talk about cooperation with Africa. Is food security an ongoing concern in Africa, in Senegal and in Africa at large? Does it go through this cooperation with Europe? Do you have other solutions to ensure food security? Thank you. I'm delighted to speak today during this mecca of the economy. I congratulate and thank Mr. Lorenzi for the wonderful welcome, but also the quality of the speakers and speeches. I'm the Associate Director General of the Eurogerm. This is something that I created in 2002. It is a group that has 13 subsidiaries in the world, in the US, Latin America, in Africa, in Maghreb, and so in North Africa. And we create technological solutions for the use of flour for food industry. In Senegal, we have a subsidiary which is very important because we produce, we market, and we sell in Senegal, but also in sub-regions. So to answer to Mr. Barnier's question, Senegal is in an area which we call MOA. There are 8 countries with a single market, which facilitates the sale of our product from Dakar to Abidjan or from Dakar to Bamako and in other countries. I would like to seize this opportunity as well to pay tribute to Senegal. Our president forwent the 3rd mandate. It's very important for the stability of the area because more than 3 countries of these regions are led by soldiers after coup d'etat. And I think that our president made a speech online, and it's important to underline the economic stability of our country, which is part and parcel of our tradition now. We have a stable country turned towards emergence. Thank you. You know, food security in Europe, like everywhere, is a matter of economic sovereignty. This is a lesson that we learned from COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. In Senegal, but also in most African countries, we really were frightened by the war because we're all importing nearly inclusively cereals from Western countries in Ukraine, in Russia. So we had to react and respond. 800,000 tons of wheat are imported. Egypt is one of the first importing countries, 10 million of tons. With Algeria, 7 to 8 million tons. Morocco, 7 to 8 million tons. Tunisia. So against this dramatic backdrop, because we were very close from a situation where we'd die of starvation, the countries have responded well. And for Senegal, the local response and what happened was that we gathered the stakeholders and the state took very strong policies, budget measures for wheat to maintain the price of bread. So the VAT was renounced on wheat, but also customs tariffs, so as to maintain the price of bread, which is an indispensable component of Senegalese food. This is a measure that the state took, but also they did the same for gas oils. They gave away a lot of subsidies. They curbed their portfolio so as to enable the population to continue having reasonable prices for food. For wheat, we initiated the harvesting of wheat. It is essentially harvested in the north. Some countries do produce it, but very little. The lesson has been learned to reach this food sovereignty. We've participated into that. There were some pilot projects, some perimeters have been outlined, and we've obtained some interesting crop results. The main difficulty is the identification of some varieties, because there are some wheats that are harvested in Europe, but they cannot be harvested in Africa. So some varieties gave a lot of reasonable and significant yields. We've had correct outcomes and had also high-quality flowers. Some countries like Senegal and Nigeria initiated this wheat production, and we managed to have significant quantities of wheat. Another thing was to diversify. We have millet, sorghum, and other types of cereals, and the state has also launched the production of special breads to incorporate these local cereals. Some stumbling blocks that we encountered, however, were the fact that the wheat went down to a normal level, 240 euros per ton. The price went back to normal. So the state now can catch a breath. But we have limits in terms of property, of land restrictions, and the price of these cereals, because millet is not harvested enough in Senegal. That's the problem of supply and demand. These cereals, well, we need a strong political will to develop other cereals, and with the technology, we can boost research and development and have other type of bread sorts. Thank you.
Alain Chibozo, you're Chief Economist with the Western African Bank of Development. A word on the development of the bank, the BOAD, and how does it tackle the challenges of food safety today? And as Amadou Seck said, does Africa have the capacity to reach its own food sovereignty, even more to be part of the world trade game? Thank you for giving me the floor. Hello, everyone. I absolutely agree with what Mr. Seck said. Africa has the capacity, the potential to reach what you call food safety. We are a development bank. The Western African Bank for Development is the bank that finances all the projects of development of the 8 countries of the CFA area. So that's 100 million inhabitants. The GDP is about $1,000 per person. So what is the issues in terms of food safety? When you finance development in our country, 60% of the jobs are linked to agriculture, and the GDP represents 6%. So if you finance development without financing agriculture, it's not going to work. The second problem that we have is we start very low, which for the last 40 years, most of the efforts have been to say, well, let's finance development with donations. But in fact, it doesn't work because donations are not sustainable. Sometimes you get some, sometimes you don't. And it doesn't work at all because our populations double every 20 years. So we would have to have the donations also being doubled every 20 years, which is not the case. So we find ourselves in a deadlock, and we decided to create new mechanisms and to reinvent how we can invest and how we can get some money, resources, funds to rebuild the ecosystem, because this is only when the ecosystem will be well done, well built, that we'll be able to attract producers, partners to develop our agriculture. Today, agriculture in our country, just one figure, the yield per hectare in cereals, the most advanced in our area is Ivory Coast. It's 2 tons per hectare. In Sahel and Nigeria, we had 2,000 tons per hectare. So that's, numbers to give you an idea. The US are 8 tons per hectare, and I think you are over 6 tons. So above 4 tons, you start to be able to think about having to do an agriculture that is less polluting, etc. But we're not there yet. We're just trying to have the right quantities for the moment. And we don't have enough mechanized equipment. So the mission of the Development Bank is to manage the urgency because we were doubling our population. We have to feed everyone. The price, after the Ukraine war, the price of raw materials has increased. We have to manage all that. But at the same time, we cannot use 100% of the resources that we're getting on this urgent matter, because we also have to look at the future of our children, grandchildren, thinking, if there's no education, if there's no schools, universities, they'll never have the scientific level to be able to contribute to the world. with where you developed countries, you're already battling the Chinese. So there's a lot to be done, and that's our mission. So how do we do it? First of all, we have three principles. The first one is we can't do it on our own. So we have to get all the goodwill that we can. We have partners. We have partners in Europe. We have partners in India. We have partners in China, knowing that each of these partners bring us a lot. Second thing is among the priorities, we have to make hierarchy in the priorities. As long as we don't have access to what we call sustainable and affordable energy, we're not going anywhere. Without energy, we cannot draw some water. The pump is not going to work without energy. So we need an energy that is accessible to everyone. Without energy, you don't have cold. You know, the products are not are going to go rotten, and they're going to go in the bin because 20 meters there's no road, and there's lots of people 20 kilometers away. There's people who would love to eat these fruits or these vegetables before they get rotten, but there's no way to get it to them. So the energy will allow us to make agriculture, to mechanize the agriculture, to do some food production. We need a lot of money for that. You know that these are investment programs that require billions of dollars. So to do that, our job is to explain to all the donors, to all the people who have money, to all the people who want to invest, what is their interest in investing and helping us solving our challenges. What do they have to benefit from it? Let me take a very simple example. Nigeria, it's 200 million inhabitants. 200 billion, inhabitants. So it's going to be more populated than the United States of America. So we have to make sure that all this population have access to food safety. And if we talk about food safety, we're going to have to deal also with the safety of the producers. Climate change, 90% of irrigation comes from rainfall in our area. But with all the disruption with the climate, sometimes rain comes too early, sometimes they come too late, and it crashes everything. So if the producer cannot recover from those crises, there won't be any more producer the year after. So there's a question of food insurance, agricultural and insurance. We got to insure them. And this is our job. Talk to bankers, talk to insurers, talk to donors, talk to all of those who see that there's an interest to build this, because by doing this, we will manage to create what we haven't done yet, which is securing the food consumption of a population that keeps growing. You know, the average age in our continent is 20 years, so they're going to keep growing, so this is a real issue. In order to do that, we have to build infrastructures. Infrastructures, we often say that the problem with infrastructures is that we are risky countries and people don't want to invest there to build infrastructure because there's too much risk. The reality is building an infrastructure requires energy. We have solar energy, we have windmill, it's free. We start having a good technology coming from China and India. And the interest of those technologies, that they're still affordable, they're not expensive, but we need partners to help us to know, to do things, to teach us how to do it. And often these partners are reluctant to come because they say, like, okay, if I bring such amount of money to develop a country, given the governance of your countries and what's going on, I risk to lose these 100 units of money that. And the real problem with private investors is they don't want to find themselves in the situation where they lose everything or most of what they brought. So us as a development bank is to tell them is the risk of loss is limited to a certain stage of development of the project. And as you know, all development projects are over a very long cycle, 10 years, 15 years. So instead of telling them we're going to use all our resources to finance some pumps, we look for partners who will invest to make pumps. And at the start of the project, when there's a risk of loss, we're going to insure ourselves this risk of loss. And if it happens, well, we'll take care of it. If it doesn't happen, that's even better. The investor is happy, he's reassured, he's going to build some pumps. And you're right, Mr. Barnier, when you say that we need to have a common market. Of course, we're going to do a common market in the free trade area in Africa. Yes, we have to do it. But before we do that, before we raise all the barriers, we have some steps to go through. Because there are too many discrepancies yet. We have some places in the south, on the coast, we have infrastructures, and then you go in the north, you go closer to Sahel, there's no more infrastructures. And if you hear about security issues, you know that ISIS, the people who work for ISIS, they fight for ISIS, they destroy infrastructure as well as people. So who's going to build them back? So everything is linked. There's security, food safety, security on its own, security of the producer. I don't want to be too long, but it's a fascinating debate. Thank you. Catherine Megan, you are Vice President and General Counsel of the International Fund of Agricultural Development. You have a global approach. You say that if there are crises, that means that there's hunger in the world. What solution do you propose to stop that vicious circle?
Intervenir en anglais. It's true that there is a vicious and growing cycle between hunger and crisis. We've heard this morning many crises we're all aware of. The war in Ukraine, the increasing prices of food, fuel, fertilizer, the impacts of climate change, particularly for agriculture, where much of agriculture in the developing world is rain-fed. The need for long-term investment and de-risking of products to channel long-term investment into agriculture. Sadly, today, this vicious circle of hunger and crisis remains. In 2022, 1.3 billion people globally were food insecure. And today, there's more conflict in the world than any year since the United Nations was created in 1945. With an estimated 2 billion people living in countries afflicted by conflict. So we need to break this vicious circle of hunger and crisis. We know that crisis drives hunger and hunger feeds crisis. And to address this, I believe we need a multifaceted approach with long-term investment in agriculture and food security in the developing world. 80% of the extreme poor live in rural areas. And rural areas are exactly where IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or FIDA en français, is focused. And it's working together with a multifaceted approach. What does that mean? I mean long-term investment, looking, as Akiko said, about sustainability, about agency, having rural communities be at the center of their projects and make their own choices about how to build and continue vibrant rural agricultural communities, using ICT for development, bringing in the best agricultural techniques and learning from others. These are parts of the multifaceted approach. I'd like to give you just a very quick example of an IFAD project to give you a real sense of the type of work that we do. We were founded in the 1970s in response to the then food and fuel crisis. And we're seeing now a crisis of the same, perhaps even greater proportions globally. And I picked Senegal because I thought it would be a nice follow-up to the wonderful words that you shared with us. As you may know, over the past decades, about 40% of Senegal's coastal mangrove forests have been decimated by climate change, including continued drought. And this has an environmental impact, yes, but it has a massive economic impact, because without the mangrove trees on many coastal areas, the villages in those areas, as well as the farms behind them, are at risk of being completely washed away. So IFAD has been investing in cooperatives led by women to rehabilitate these areas and rehabilitate the mangroves. This protects the coastal villages, as well as allows the traditional farming, and we've worked to increase and introduce new high-value add farming, in this case, oyster production. I wanted to tell you very quickly the story of one farmer, Marianne Ndong, who is leading a female cooperative now producing oysters which attach to the roots of the mangrove trees in the sea. They've built capacity and know-how across the cooperative, and not only do they produce oysters, but they jar and package oysters so that they can be sold at a much higher price and have a much more successful crop. Today, Marianne says that not only is her village protected from being wiped away from the sea, but furthermore, she is a successful entrepreneur. She's able to send her children to school and reinvest in her community. That's the type of sustainable, long-term investment that is needed in agriculture. I'd like to also just say a very quick word about the need for inclusivity in agriculture. I was really struck by the inspiring session that we had on Friday night with Madame Christine Lagarde and others asking, where are the women? And I'd like to focus that on agriculture. You may know that about half the world's food calories are produced by women. And yet women hold title to only 15%, 15% of land globally. If women had full access to the same agricultural production resources as men, up to 150 million people would escape hunger. That is a powerful and startling statistic, and it shows, I believe, the importance of full inclusion. I believe with multifaceted approaches and inclusiveness, together we can tackle hunger and crisis and break this vicious circle.
Alors, il nous reste...
So we now have a few minutes left, a few precious minutes before concluding. So I'm going to ask each of you in a few minutes if you had a challenge that you wanted to put forward to ensure food safety. Which one would it be? Michel Barnier, do you want to start? 1 minute each, no more. It's not an easy question. It's too global. Food safety for who and where? It's not the same thing to answer that question in countries where Mr. Chibozo talked about, in Nigeria and elsewhere, with Nigeria, with also some political insecurity than in France, for example, in Europe. So the challenge is to have an ecological growth, for me. And that could be applied to everyone with some different issues for everyone. I think Europe has to keep fighting for this ecological growth, remaining a land of production, food production, and be able to cooperate and transfer in terms of research, agronomic, robotics, digital research, all the elements that agriculture needs for this agriculture growth. So agriculture growth for Michel Barnier. Thierry Blandinière. No, I don't really have much to add. Maybe sustainable growth, more innovation. Explain that innovation is the key and invest more in innovation and research. Let's imagine new plants, maybe that could be resistant to drought. Invest more collectively at the scale of public policies at the European level with the visibility on Africa, not to remain focused on Europe and show that Europe is part of the solution, because in Africa we know that we'll not be able to feed 100% of the population with a local production, and do some partnerships with African countries to co-construct some sustainable networks. Alain Chibozo. I would say that I agree 100%. My conclusion is to make of us the West African Development Bank of somebody who's bringing solutions. We're open to everyone. We're open to every goodwill. It's a duty for everyone. If we don't solve these issues will have to be exported. So I'd rather see our countries and our development bank as bringing solution than to leave it down to the generation of my children. We're going to still talk about exporting our problems towards you. Catherine Megan.
In agricultural development. It's not only the morally right thing to do, it makes political sense and financial sense. Morally, investing long-term in agricultural development is the only way we're going to reach SDG 2, no hunger. Politically, food security is national security. It decreases migration, decreases the link between crisis and hunger. And financially, investing $1 today in long-term agricultural security can save up to $10 tomorrow in emergency food aid.
Amadou Seck.
Amadou Seck, yes. As far as I'm concerned, the challenge is the price, because the priorities are not the same in Africa and in Europe. I'm talking about wheat. There are wheat varieties of GMOs, like in Argentina and in Brazil and other large countries. They have authorized the importation of this wheat. Should we in Africa talk about sustainable development and traceability, well, and let the populations be in a situation of hunger? Or should we allow some varieties where food security could be found? And that's we do not have the same dilemmas, and I think we should take this into consideration. Kiko, to wrap up this session, a few words. I think that we have learned during this session how to tackle food safety by going beyond the notion of humanitarian crisis to go through structural dimensions. Food is a human right. This is tantamount to the dignity of human beings. Food sovereignty at the individual level, and we should find some sort of food sovereignty, maybe not at the national level, but at the regional level, the different regions of the world. And if I should say one word, I would say interdependence, cooperation. These are the takeaway words. Thank you for your attendance and participation, and I wish you